Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this big guy right here. This is the Victorinox Hunter Pro. First off though, I want to thank very much my buddy Nico for sending this guy along. This is a knife I probably never would have checked out otherwise, and it's always nice to see something that's frankly a little bit outside my comfort zone, my range. And so thank you very much for that, Nico. Next thing, let's do a quick size comparison real quick. This is a big old freaking knife, is the technical term for it. Here it is next to your Spyderco Delica, which is a lot smaller than this knife. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2 and your Rat number 1. And here it is against my token freaking ginormous knife. This is the ZT-0452CF. And so you can see that in terms of overall size, this is actually reasonably big. I mean, even compared to the 452, it's not all that small. And so that's really actually pretty hardcore. And the other thing, the other dimension I want to highlight here, there we go, is the thickness of this guy. Holy crap, is this thing thick. That's absolutely nuts. And so that's pretty thick. Then finally, I got to note, this is going to be a quick review because this is the Victorinox Hunter Pro, and I am neither a hunter nor a pro. So I'm doing my best here, but my best may not be good enough. So anyways, let's go ahead and talk about what's good about this guy and what I'm not finding so good about this guy. The good side, first off, I do love the wood handles. Look, I'm a big fan of wood on knives just because at some level, A, it's an attractive material, and B, for whatever reason, it seems to be the case that the scared are soothed by the presence of wood. A knife that would be absolutely terrifying to somebody in black carbon fiber, a G10 or something like that, wearing a set of wood pants, so to speak, is much more palatable. And so that may actually make this an option in some places where this big old knife wouldn't be otherwise. And they do offer a Zytel version or some other variety of plastic in black plastic that's going to be a lot more tactical than this guy is. So the wood is very nice. Next thing, the opening hole is good. I'm a big fan of opening holes in general. I think they're a really graceful solution as they don't tend to get in the way of the cutting, which is nice. And you know, honestly, it works well, and from a variety of different ergonomic standpoints, it's pretty solid in that way. Next thing, ergonomically speaking, this is very nicely contoured. It's got a couple of little ergonomic fouls, I think mostly related to the fact that I've got smaller hands than most, but you know what? On the whole, this is very large, and so it fills the hand very nicely, and it's got this sculpting in here. I mean, this is just designed in such a way that it's not going anywhere in the hand, and that's really great. Next thing, the shield on this guy is attractive. I gotta say, it's a beautiful thing. Absolutely. And it has the effect of sort of making this guy not entirely traditional. Without that on there, this would have a tendency, I think, to feel very just like stodgy and old school, whereas this makes it maybe a little bit more modern, so I appreciate very much doing that. Next thing, this is apparently a movie cameo. This is a variation of the knife used in the movie The Martian with Matt Damon. Great movie, even greater book, by the way. Read the freaking book. It's incredible. Though the movie actually did it fair just anyways, that's a movie review. Outside the scope. And then finally on the stuff I liked, this does cut very nicely. It has a relatively thin behind-the-edge sort of blade. The Victorinox steel sharpens up to an obscenely sharp edge very, very easily, and it is not a super thick blade at all. I mean, even though this is a very big knife, practically speaking, the blade stock is about the same thickness as your Delica here, and although the grind doesn't go all the way up here, this does cut, and I very much did appreciate that. This is a very solid cutting tool, with the backlock making it very secure and whatnot. I very much do enjoy that aspect of it, and so to me, all of that is what I liked about this guy. It does cut very, very nicely. It has an interesting movie cameo. I do like the shield that makes it a little bit more modern. The nice contouring does lead to some very ergonomic feelings, along with things like thumb ramp here. The opening hole works well, always, and it is got these wood handles, which will tend to soothe some of the fearful. On the bad side, first off, this is bad to me, but probably not to other folks. This is a pretty huge knife. I mean, if we measure it off, we're coming in at about 3.77 inches, 3.75, depending how you want to measure. Look, it's a big freaking knife, and that's going to be a problem for some people. And frankly, it's just very bulky is the other issue. I mean, seriously, thickness-wise, this is the thickest thing on my table by a pretty good margin. Actually, no, that's not true. This guy, another Victorinox, also from my buddy Nico, a little bit thicker, but it's also got a bunch of other tools in there, so it's just these handles are very, very thick, overlaid on top of steel liners. Which is, yeah, so it's a thick one, that's for damn sure. Next thing, this does not have a pocket clip, which is a big part of the reason why this isn't the knife that is really ultimately for me. I tend to like a pocket clip because, well, belt pouches, although this works and it comes with a very nice belt pouch here, they just don't tend to be the perfect choice for me and for my life particularly. They're okay, they work, but it just, I don't know, I would much rather have the quick access to the pocket here, and this guy is a little bit, well, big and bulky for that. So, whatever, not a big deal. Next thing, this is not a disassemblable knife. I mean, it could be that if you can pry off the wood there, you can re-glue it afterwards, but chances are you're going to treat this knife as a sealed system. Look, it's a backlock, and at the end of the day, the only area you really ever need to get at is this part right in here, and you can kind of wash things out and whatnot. So it's going to be okay, but I do tend to, I look at disassembly as being a luxury of modern knives, an improvement relative to old designs, and the fact that this doesn't offer that at all is a little frustrating to me. Next thing, this is a little bit rattly. What I mean by that is, if you just kind of shake it around, every time that you hit something, you feel it rattling around in there, and as a result, I'm not super impressed with the construction on it, and especially given there's nothing I can tighten here. Maybe it's just the blade rattling back and forth, and I think that's honestly a big part of it, is that the blade is able to kind of hit to one side or the other as you're shaking it around. But just on the belt, you just feel it bouncing around in there, and that's not something I'm a big fan of. Next thing, this has not the remotest chance of one-hand closing. I mean, maybe somebody with an exceptional amount of skill could pull it off, or if you use like a thigh or something, you can do that. But honestly, this is not a knife that's really, really good for, you know, for instance, the Spyderco Delica is also a backlock, but it's got this unsharpened portion here, so you can do one of these things, pop it loose. With this guy, if you want to try and one-hand close it, you're fighting the lock bar anyways, but then you have to use some other surface, and I don't know, maybe somebody with really huge hands could do it, but I sure can't. So not the remotest chance, not the best phrasing, but it's a thing. And actually not finally at all, but this does use a Victorinox mystery steel. If you look on their website, or on any of the dealer websites, this is just referred to as stainless steel. And look, I have no doubt that it is in fact a stainless steel, and it's probably similar to the steels that Victorinox is using elsewhere, and honestly, that's not a good thing. At least to my taste, Victorinox steel is always just terribly underperforming. I mean, it takes a very, very nice edge. It's very, very easy to sharpen, but it doesn't hold on to that edge for very long at all, and I'm not a big fan of that. So mystery steels, especially from Victorinox, who's got a track record of really crappy steel, just doesn't do it for me at all. Then, getting toward the end, getting to final, the balance on this guy, to me, honestly doesn't feel very good. It's very far back. It could just be a function of the wood, but it feels a little bit unwieldy as a result of it. It's not terrible, it's not the end of any worlds, but the balance just, it doesn't feel right. Because it's a relatively heavy knife, and it's weirdly distributed. Speaking of the weight, this is a 5.5 ounce knife, which given the size is not completely out of line, but yeah, that's a little weird. Speaking of using this guy, the blade on this feels weirdly far from the hand on a couple of different dimensions. Not only is it far on this dimension with about maybe an inch, about like half an inch or so of difference between where your hand is and where the blade is, but it's on a different axis in this domain. Cutting with this, it felt like there was a layer of abstraction there that I wasn't a big fan of, and especially if you're trying to get down onto a board or something, that's not going to work really well at all here, so I'm not a big fan of that. And then finally on the bad side, and the thing that would be ugly if this were a full review, is that the unlocking process isn't really pleasant, and the reason for that is that it is just a little bit too shallow here. I mean, you can get in it, but you're really having, I mean, look at, this is the level at which this backlock needs to be in order for this to actually unlock the blade. And that just means that you're pushing very, very hard, and you don't really have that much of a surface to push into. You're really right at the edge of what you can push there, and so it makes it a lot harder to disengage this knife than I'd like it to be. If they'd scooped this out just a little bit deeper so you had a little bit more clearance for your finger, I feel like it'd be a lot easier. But as it is, you're really relying on the bone of your finger to press into that as hard as it can to get in there, and that just makes this a lot less pleasant than most backlocks. And so they need to include that is a much bigger notch here. So those are the things I don't like here, is that the unlocking process isn't very pleasant. The blade feels a little bit far from the hand on kind of two different axes. The balance is not all that great. It's a little weird, a little far back. It's got a Victorinox mystery steel, which doesn't tend to be very good. It is going to be really hard to one-hand close without maybe using some other surface to do that, which I'm not a big fan of. It has it feels a little bit rattly in the pocket here. It's not disassemblable at all. There is no clip option, and it is kind of huge, but that might be a pro for many people. But look, I mean, at some level, final conclusions, I feel like this may be a knife that at some level I may never understand. I'm not a hunter, I'm not a pro, and so here we go. I mean, this is something I'm going to lack. But it does a number of things that don't tend to jive with me. It is big. It's designed for larger hands, and I really do feel like that's a factor here. I think I'd probably like this a lot more if I had much bigger fingers, so this bigger handle worked for me. It has no clip, which is a major problem for me, at least personally, and it's using Victorinox mystery steel when I tend to be a steel snob, liking a lot of wear resistance. And the price tag on this guy is the last thing. I mean, this guy is coming in at about $60, and that's a fair amount of freaking money for something like this here. Look, I know that because I am not the guy to review this, I'm going to be getting a bunch of angry comments on this, calling me a city idiot. That's one I love, by the way. Or a vegetarian, which is true, and explaining how, my masculinity is nowhere near turgid enough to effectively wield this knife, and that's fine. Masculinity affirmation, by comparison, is one of many services I offer here on the channel. But the thing is, it doesn't work for me. This isn't a knife that makes sense to me. That said, I'm also pretty sure that it's a reasonable tool that will probably serve some people well. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there in the world with one of these pouches on the belt that love it, and for whom this has been a great thing, but ultimately, I find it really hard to recommend, because at one level, there feels like there's a lot more bad here than there is good and great, but at another level, in terms of more modern cutlery, there are a lot of really great options in this size range and in this price range. There were things like, for instance, you get your Spyderco, your steel wheel cut jack, or your Ontario Rat number 1. The Rat 1 is in a very similar size range to this guy, but it also has a lot of modern affordances, like, for instance, a pocket clip, the ability to take it apart if you get it all dirty and whatnot. Those things are very, very nice. For $60, you're very, very close to, for instance, the Spyderco Endura, which is a really excellent option, which is going to be lighter in weight, is going to be a little bit, at least to my hand, a little bit more ergonomic, and just feels it's got a nicer steel, although it doesn't take all that much relative Vic. And, if you're willing to go with, like, for instance, a Chinese brand, you can get a whole bunch of stuff for way less than this. And, of course, if you're out being an ultimate hunter, just get a damn fixed blade. I don't talk much about fixed blades, but they are a really excellent tool for outdoorsing because, well, you don't have to worry about any of this. You just tuck it back in the sheath and your case freaking closed. And so, at some level, sure, I'm sure there are people who love it out there, and maybe I'm just completely missing the point here, but this is just not a knife I recommend, even if you are a pro hunter. And so I can't see this guy sticking around in my life, and I'm not sure it's something I would send you to in yours. But let me know in the comments if you've fallen in love with this guy, or if you are a pro hunter and you still dislike it. I'd love to hear that too. But mostly, I hope that you found this interesting, that it was nice to see me review something Swiss that isn't a watch, and that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.